Russia's winning. They are winning decisively across the entire battlefront. Now, if you get your information from The Economist, The Financial Times, The New York Times, The Washington Post, you are reading undiluted propaganda. Trump's legacy, MAGA, the one big beautiful bill, tariffs, that legacy is in danger of being destroyed by Trump's failure to get out of the war in Ukraine.
Is it true that Putin can't continue this forever? I know the economy is growing, but will it get to a point where it isn't sustainable?
Putin's fine. Russia's fine. This is really widely misunderstood. The guy who's boxed himself into a very bad position is Trump. He's been critical of Zelensky at times and then critical of Putin. To him, that's the art of the deal. But the art of the deal is not the art of war. The art of war is a completely different thing. Diplomacy is a completely different thing. And Trump does not understand that very well. Trump listened to really bad advice from a bunch of warmongers who think Putin's going to cave. He's very smart. He's very deliberate. He's the opposite of Trump. He does not shoot from the hip. He does not bluff. Show me a winning army in the history of the world that agreed to an unconditional ceasefire. It doesn't happen. Every single thing about this has been disastrous for the West. This is where the geopolitical eggheads don't understand markets. If Putin's depending on high-priced oil revenue to finance the war, the way to stop the war is to get the price of oil down to $30, $40. Well, how do you do that? Not with sanctions, but let Russia pump as much, let Saudi Arabia pump as much, U.S. open up the federal lands, open up the Gulf of America, offshore drilling, Alaska. Stop the sanctions, flood the market with oil, get the price down to $30, and Putin will stop the war.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
Hey, I know investing in crypto is scary. It takes a real leap of faith because there are so many scams, rug pulls, and bad actors out there. It's a dangerous business, which is why 95% of people lose all their money. Well, that's why I created the London Real Investment Club, so you can access the hottest deals on the planet and use the crypto bull market to create the generational wealth that you deserve. Join my team of over 100 people from around the world that are making millions of dollars behind the scenes investing in blockchain, AI, Web3 games, DeFi, Bitcoin, and more. Don't miss out. Click the link below to book a call with one of my team now. But hurry, this bull market will end soon.
I know investing in crypto can be scary. That's why you gotta join the investment club. Pull the trigger. Let's do this.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Jim Rickards, the economist, attorney, and former investment advisor, renowned for predicting major disruptions in global financial markets. You are a former advisor to the Pentagon, the CIA, and the U.S. Treasury Department, where you were called upon to simulate global financial war games and stress test the American economy. Earlier in your career, you served as general counsel for long-term capital management and held senior roles at major institutions like Citibank. Today, your insights help investors, governments, and institutions prepare for what you warn is a looming monetary reset. You've been sounding the alarm that we're not just facing a recession, but a long-term depression, triggered by broken supply chains, $36 trillion in debt, and AI's destabilizing role in finance. The Ukraine conflict is a key flashpoint, especially with Trump's recent deadline for a Russian ceasefire. If ignored, it could trigger secondary sanctions on China and India and send shockwaves through energy and gold markets. Jim, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be with you.
Great to have you here. I think we jump right into what's going on with Putin and Russia and Ukraine, because I don't feel like this is getting enough airtime. And I think we're really days away from the deadline, what do you see happening here?
Well, first of all, I think you're exactly right about that, Brian. The war is 3.5 years old. It started in February 2022. Here we are in, late 2025. People seem to have short attention spans. The news cycle moves on, et cetera. So there has been a decline in interest, but that's a mistake. It's probably never been at a more critical stage and more important. And here's what I would say, just by way of introduction. Ukraine by itself is a huge story. If we were just talking about the war, the Russian advance, what Zelensky's doing, the US, I got to say the UK, they've been among the biggest warmongers, but not, on a par with the US and Germany. And that proxy war aspect and confrontation, if that's all it were, and that's a lot, it would be a huge story. But it's not. Ukraine is at the center of a lot of other threads, including global trade, sanctions, Israel, Iran, China, India, Trump's tariffs, etc., the price of oil. So it is a much, much bigger story. You start with Ukraine, but it kind of goes out in ripples from there to embrace the entire U.S. economy. So I think investors who or just people interested in geopolitics or the news who are not well acquainted with it are actually missing a big story.
Yeah, and right now, Putin doesn't seem to be reacting very well. The few sound bites I sent have been quite confrontational. Obviously, Trump sent over the submarines, I think on the back of a comment that it was Medvedev that made. This does feel like it's getting tense, and it feels like he's hit a pain point with Putin, whereas these increased sanctions, and he's already talking about India sending oil to Russia and how he wants to shut that down with the latest tariffs. I mean, Putin can't afford this to happen, right?
Putin's fine. Russia's fine. This is really widely misunderstood. The guy who's boxed himself into a very bad position is Trump. And again, this is big picture, Brian. We'll get into a lot more detail. But the way to understand Trump's position right now, he came into office. He was sworn in January, last January 2025, to his second term. He had an opportunity to get out of Ukraine right away. He could have said, okay, sorry, Zelensky, we're cutting off financial aid. We're cutting off military aid. Good luck. You're on your own. This is not our fight. France, Germany, you want to carry on. UK, good show, but we're out of this thing. And that would have been that. The U.S. people, the American people would have understood it. The warmongers, the bloodstained banders, people like Lindsey Graham would not have stood for it. John Bolton would be foaming at the mouth, et cetera. But too bad. I mean, who cares? The MAGA movement and the vast majority of American people would have supported that. Instead, he's kept the war going. Now, he's been critical of Zelensky at times and then critical of Putin. He's kind of flip-flopping a little bit. Well, maybe not even flip-flopping. To him, that's the art of the deal. And I'll give Trump credit for knowing the art of the deal. But the art of the deal is not the art of war. The art of war is a completely different thing. Diplomacy is a completely different thing. And Trump does not understand that very well. And I think he's showing that. So Trump is repeating the mistake of LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, President Johnson. Johnson became president after the assassination of JFK in November 1963. So, okay, give him a transition. And we had an election in 1964. Johnson won by one of the biggest landslides in U.S. history. So by January 65, he had a free hand. That war, the war in Vietnam, that was, you could say it was Kennedy's war, but really Eisenhower's war. But Eisenhower and Kennedy together had got the U.S. where they were. The assassination of President Jim, which was conducted by the CIA with help from the South Vietnamese. Now, Johnson could have said the same thing. So, hey, you know what? We're out of this. Don't know how we got here. Last thing we need is a land war in Asia. It's going nowhere. We can fight. We can win battles, but we can't win the war in the long run. We're out. Hey, South Vietnam, good luck. We wish you well, but we're out of this thing. He could have done that, and the American people would have understood it. He didn't. He listened to McGeorge Bundy, Robert McNamara, other bad advice from the warmongers. They escalated, carpet bombing, et cetera. And by 1968, we had 500,000 troops in Vietnam. Now, we didn't actually get out of the war until there was a peace treaty in 1972 that Nixon and Kissinger engineered. And of course, the last helicopter out of Saigon off the roof of the embassy, we all remember that famous picture, was 1975. But Johnson had the opportunity to end it in 1965. He didn't, and that destroyed his legacy. He was going to run for re-election in 1968, and he withdrew because of the anti-war opposition from Robert F. Kennedy and G. McCarthy. So now think of what else Johnson did. He did the Great Society, Medicare, on and on and on. Enormous social welfare programs, bigger than anything we had seen since FDR. But Johnson's legacy was destroyed by his failure to get out of Vietnam. Trump's legacy, MAGA, the one big beautiful bill, tariffs. I'm a big supporter of Trump, by the way. I think he's doing a lot of things right in the U.S. economy. That legacy is in danger of being destroyed by Trump's failure to get out of the war in Ukraine. So that's kind of where we are. We're at that turning point. But Trump has made this has now become Trump's war. I said this, I was doing another interview with a kind of a MAGA channel the other day, and the host interrupted me. He said, "Hold on, Jim, did you just say this is Trump's war?" I said, "Yes, he's crossed the threshold. This is now his war. We'll see how he handles it from here." But he failed to get out when he had the opportunity. Now he's getting in deeper and deeper, and it's going to get worse and worse.
Now, Jim, he had Zelensky in the White House, and Trump was still fairly new to the administration, and it felt like he really was going to end it. And then it felt like there was this turn. It felt like when he went to the Vatican and he met him there, or maybe he was in the ear of some other leaders, but it seemed like he decided to keep it going. And I just didn't understand why, because he doesn't require the funding of the arms makers, or is it that other members of Congress put the pressure and said, we've got to keep this up? It never computed for me.
It's first of all, your description is exactly right, Brian. He did pivot. He pivoted in favor of the war. That was fairly recent, and that's when I said it's not Biden's war anymore. It was Biden's war after Trump was sworn in. It was Biden's war for several months. No one disputed that. It has now become Trump's war because of the pivot. Your description was exactly right. But you point to the bigger question, which is why. Yes, some members of Congress, it's Lindsey Graham and some others, Tom Cotton, but it's really people around the White House. It's people in the Trump inner circle, not all of them. If you said, who's got this right? Who wants to get out and keep out? It's J.D. Vance and anyway, J.D. Vance primarily. Pete Hegseth. J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth have it right. The people who have it wrong, I would say Marco Rubio, General Keith Kellogg, who's one of his top advisors and envoys to Ukraine, Mike Waltz, who was briefly the national security advisor. He's now ambassador to the UN, but he's still around. He's still part of that inner circle. And even Stephen Miller, who was pretty sound. Usually, I agree with him. Came out the other day, was critical of Russia. So there is a group around Trump who are pro-war. They're the neocons. Now, again, Trump just doesn't have a lot of experience in this. I know he was president for 4 years. I get it, but he was so caught up in the Russiagate and the impeachment and the COVID and a lot of other things that kind of, really destroyed his first term. He's learned lessons from a lot of that. He's doing much better this time, particularly on the economy. But these neocons have not gone away, and they're still around, and they're tipping him towards expanding the war. Now, the biggest, I'll say, delusion, because we have a lot of evidence to the contrary, are the role of sanctions. Now, I happen to be an expert on sanctions. I did this for the intelligence community for 10 years. I was, I put a special committee together for the Committee on Foreign Investment to the United States. I did a lot of intelligence work related to that. I worked with the National Intelligence Council and the CIA. I said that the sanctions would not work when they put them on immediately in February 2022 after the special military operation. Biden put on sanctions. I teach a class in financial warfare at the U.S. Army War College and down in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I taught that class in April 2022. So it was really just a few weeks after the invasion and after the sanctions were put in place. And I told my class, it's a small group, about 13 people, mid-career officers, lieutenant colonels, brigade commanders, Navy commanders, and others. I said, well, here's the thing. Here are how the sanctions work. They're all going to fail. The Russian economy will prosper. The Russian ruble will be fine. And this will cost the United States more than it costs Russia. It's all going to backfire on us. And I got a lot of pushback. I mean, it's seminar style. So, you want the pushback, you want the give and take. They were all gung ho, we're going to win the war, and all this stuff. And I said, no, I've seen enough of this. This is not my first rodeo, so to speak, and these are going to fail. A year later, in May 2023, I taught the course again. And I said, let me tell you what I told last year's class. And I told them, and I said, I was right about everything. The sanctions have failed. The ruble is strong. And today, Brian, I mean, this was true 2 years ago, but it's true today. The Russian economy is outperforming the US economy. The Russian ruble is stable against the US dollar. Remember Biden, banging the table, the ruble is going to be rubble. The ruble is going to be rubble. It's not. It's actually a little bit stronger against the US dollar. The US stole $300 billion of US Treasury securities that were lawfully purchased and owned by Russia as part of Russia's reserves. Russia had about $600 billion in reserve positions. About half of it, $300 billion, was in US Treasury securities and some mortgage-backed securities, but US dollar denominated, mostly held on deposit at Euroclear, which is the biggest clearing organization in Europe. By the way, Euroclear has about $40 trillion of assets worldwide that it holds in custody, but that's where they were. So the US froze them. We do that all the time. We're really good at freezing your assets. But then we went a step further and began to steal them as collateral for loans to Ukraine, which is completely non-creditworthy, to pay for the war against Russia. So here, Russia's, lawful exports of oil, they earn them dollars that they invested in the US Treasury market, trusting the US and the rule of law, have been stolen and converted into loans to finance Ukraine to fight Russia. So it's almost like Russia's paying for the war against themselves. That has implications for the US Treasury market that we can talk about. The smartest thing Russia did, and this, the head of the central bank of Russia is Elvira Nabiullina. I always say she's the only central bank in the world who really understands her job. But she began in 2009. It's 2009, 15, so this was 16 years ago, to buy gold, physical gold. And Russia got to the point where 25% or $150 billion of their 600 billion in reserves was in physical gold in Russia, not anywhere else. You cannot hack gold. You can't trace it. You can't freeze it. You can't do anything with it. It's not even a molecule. It's an element, atomic number 79. You can melt it down. It's untraceable. So that was smart. Now here's one of the ironies. I love these little ironies. So we steal 300 billion from the Russians, right? So their reserve position gets whacked to that extent, which is a big hit. But on the 150 billion of gold, because of the geopolitical conflicts and because of the loss of trust in the US, they have made over $60 billion of mark-to-market profits on the gold. Because they started buying that gold in 2009, and gold was still, I don't know, like $700 an ounce at the time. But now it's actually today it's very close to an all-time high. It's up well over $3,400 an ounce. But my point is, yeah, we're still in their treasuries, but they make $60 billion on the gold. So she knew what she was doing, and Russia. That's one more reason why Russia is not in financial distress, because they have physical gold that you can't steal. So the sanctions don't work. We put 15 rounds of sanctions. I mean, when I say rounds, each round with like dozens of particular provisions or companies or individuals being targeted, et cetera. So you're really talking about hundreds upon hundreds of sanctions. None of them have worked. Why does Trump think the next round is going to work?
Okay.
I mean, you've been failing for 3 years with hundreds of sanctions. Why do you think your next round of sanctions is going to work? But
And
the other
he
thing
even
is,
publicly said that. I think he's like, they've been proven that they don't work, but we're going to do them anyways. He said something like that.
well, he did. That's some self-awareness anyway, but that is the case. But now Trump has gone further and he's boxed himself in by giving Putin an ultimatum. Now, ultimatum is not a throwaway word. It is a hugely significant term in diplomacy. I don't think Americans are very good at diplomacy anymore, but the Russians are. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, is the master. He's the best at it in the world. There are a couple other good ones, but Sergei Lavrov understands this. When you give somebody an ultimatum, what you're saying is either do this by a certain date or it's war. And that's what an ultimatum is, or some very, very bad consequence. So first, there was some weeks ago, Trump said, I'm giving Putin a 50-day ultimatum.
Yeah.
He's got to do an unconditional ceasefire within 50 days, or bad things are going to happen. Trump didn't really spell it out, but we kind of know what's on the list. He said bad things are going to happen, 50 days. So a certain period of time went by, a few weeks went by, and then Trump suddenly said, you know what, it's going to be 10 days. It's not 50 days anymore, it's 10 days. Okay, that 10 days runs out August 8th, which is just a few days from now. Okay, so that's the ultimatum. By the way, Putin just shrugged. I mean, Putin's like, Putin's interesting. He's very smart. He's very deliberate. He's the opposite of Trump. He does not shoot from the hip. He does not bluff. And this is one of the biggest mistakes. I don't know why Americans are so ill-informed on Russia, but they keep saying, well, Putin's bluffing, keep pushing. Putin doesn't bluff. He may like what he says or not, but he does not bluff. But again, he's thoughtful, doesn't shoot from the hip. When he says something, you know it's been given a lot of consideration. Now, Medvedev is like the attack dog. Okay, he was president of Russia for a few years, and he's still around. He's a deputy head of the their equivalent of our National Security Council. So he has a big role. But Medvedev's the one who's like just tearing Trump apart and throwing names around, and why Trump would respond to him when you're at that level. You're supposed to be dealing with Putin. I don't know, but Trump took the bait, and he said in response to comments Medvedev had, like, we don't really care about your sanctions, or we don't really take it seriously. Trump said, well, I'll show you. I'm dispatching 2 U.S. nuclear submarines to an unknown destination, but good reason to believe it's in proximity to Russia. By the way, why are we giving away locations of our nuclear submarines? I mean, that's the technology is all about not knowing where they are.
That's the art of the deal, not the art of war, is what you're referring to.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So first of all, why are you taking the bait from Medvedev when you're supposed to be dealing with Putin? Two, why are you giving away locations of nuclear assets? But more importantly, why are you using nuclear weapons as not even a bargaining chip, but part of threatening? You're escalating the rhetoric, not just the rhetoric, you're escalating the actions to the brink of nuclear war. Does Trump not understand that nuclear war is the end of life on Earth? I mean, maybe the cockroaches will survive, but not the humans.
Which is strange, because he's been caught numerous times saying that this is an existential threat that no one takes seriously enough, and that people should never even use that as a veiled threat when they do. He's called out leaders that do it, including the Russians, and now he's doing it himself. It's odd. It's odd.
Well, it's definitely odd. Introducing the nuclear element into what is otherwise a conventional, albeit horrific, high casualty war is reckless in my view. But okay, he did it. But getting back to kind of where things stand with Putin. So Trump gave this ultimatum. It's up in a couple of days. Putin's not going to respond. Show me, and here's why. Here's why, Brian. I don't just like to make declaratory statements without backing it up. Russia's winning. They are winning decisively across the entire battlefront. Now, if you get your information from The Economist, the Financial Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, you are reading undiluted propaganda. They have a narrative about the war's a stalemate because it hasn't moved very much. It's not a stalemate. You have to understand the Russian way of war. Like right now, their main objective is a city called Pokrovsk. Now, Pokrovsk it's a decent sized city, but it's a logistics hub. The highways, the railroads, et cetera, that run through it it's highly networked. And it's the way that Ukraine supplies their troops along the entire front. You run it to Pokrovsk, and then you move it to someplace else. You take that, you basically, it's like ripping the heart out of the Ukrainian effort. As difficult as it is, they're suffering in a lot of other ways. Okay, but how does Russia do it? They've spent the past year taking every village and town completely around it. They've surrounded it. So then when they surround it, and they did this in Bakhmut, they did this in Avdiivka, they've done it in Chasiv Yar, which just fell to the Russians in recent days, even though that battle's been going on for a year. So by doing that, then when they go in for the kill, there's no way out. The Ukrainian troops can't escape. They cannot resupply. And basically Russia says, surrender or die. We'll give you the ability to surrender, and you'll go to a prison camp, a prisoner of war camp in Russia, but that's a choice. But if you want to fight, you're fighting to the death. And they do. This is what happens to the Kursk. When Zelensky invaded Kursk, which is part of the Russian Federation, that's not Ukrainian territory. That took about a year, but the Russians killed them to the last man. They couldn't get out. That's going to happen to Pokrovsk. So you say, okay, if you're the New York Times, well, nothing moved in a year. Well, actually, something moved. They surrounded it. Now they're going in for the kill. This is where the Western, Financial Times type propaganda is basically lying to audiences and around the world really, but UK and US in particular.
But
So
is it true that Putin can't continue this forever? I know the economy is growing, but will it get to a point where it isn't sustainable anymore?
it's totally
Investment Club. Today, I consider it the best investment that I've ever made. We get 4 projects presented a week by their associated CEOs. Personally, I'm completely blown away by the quality of these projects, and I know of nowhere else where I would be given this same opportunity. Each week that passes, I feel more appreciative of the fact that I'm a member of this group. The vibe was just tremendous. Everybody's on the same wavelength. We just clicked. Everybody listened to each other, enjoyed their company. It was just magical, magical. Take action. Don't take my word for it. Due diligence you need to do. And I really hope that someday down the road I see you in the club. It far exceeded expectations, without question.
sustainable. And let's turn to that. Really good question, Brian. So by the way, I had a conversation with Peter Navarro. He's the trade and manufacturing czar in the White House.
Yeah, we've had him on the show.
Peter's a great guy. So not long ago, and he's like a conversation with him is like an oral exam and a PhD oral exam. I mean, it's really tough, and he asks really hard questions, which is fine. But he's got the professorial aspect of it, but a really good guy. But I kind of hit him with something he hadn't thought of, and he said, "Yeah, you're right." I said, "You want to end this war? Stop the sanctions, flood the market with oil, get the price down to $30, and Putin will stop the war."
Mm.
That's how. Peter said, "Yeah, you're right." Because what are we doing? We're putting on more sanctions. We're raising the price of oil. We're putting more money in Putin's pocket. And so to answer your question, Brian, he can finance the war indefinitely at these high oil prices. 60, 65. It's been up to 90 not that long ago, but 65, 70 or higher, and I think it will go higher for the reasons we're discussing, finances the war, and Putin can continue it indefinitely. If you want to, this is where the geopolitical eggheads don't understand markets, right? If Putin's depending on high-priced oil revenue to finance the war, the way to stop the war is to get the price of oil down to 30, $40. Well, how do you do that? Not with sanctions. Take the sanctions, let Russia pump as much, let Saudi Arabia pump as much, U.S. open up the federal lands, open up the Gulf of America, offshore drilling, Alaska, flood the market with oil, get the price down to 30, $40, and then Russia will cave, but not before. So so now let's just take that thread a step further. So I talked about, okay, what's Trump going to do on August 8th? What's he going to do when this ultimatum runs out? Well, he could do nothing, in which case he's completely lost credibility. He's embarrassed himself and he's weakened the United States. They won't do that, but that's kind of one choice. What is he going to do? Well, one thing he could do is increase arms shipments, okay, to Ukraine, because U.S. has been dialing those down. All right, let's talk about that. This has been another one of these narratives, these mainstream media narratives that's false, by the way, since the beginning of the war. The wonder weapons. Okay, so what do? We sent HIMARS precision-guided artillery to Ukraine. It took about a month or less for the Russians to hack the GPS system, so they go off course. They fall into cornfields, right? I mean, you can't if the precision-guided artillery is guided by GPS, and you can hack the GPS. Those missiles are harmless because they don't go anywhere. Okay, so forget the HIMARS. Patriot anti-missile batteries. By the way, they cost $1 billion a piece. $1 billion, and there aren't that many of them in the world. But we gave them 7 or 8. The Russians systematically destroyed every one of them. $7 billion down the drain. How did they do that? What about the Patriot? What about the Golden Dome and the Iron Dome and the Patriot anti-missile system? They can't hit hypersonic missiles. They can hit cruise missiles. Cruise missiles go about 500, 600 miles an hour. These hypersonic missiles, some of them go 10,000 miles per hour, and the Patriots can't hit them. So what good are your Patriot missile and a Patriot anti-missile defense batteries doing if hypersonic missiles can blow them up, which they are? So send them a few more, waste a couple more $1 billion. By the way, we're stripping our own arsenals of those weapons. And the U.S., we're supposed to have them here in the U.S. to protect, critical infrastructure. We want to give, to the extent we have any, we want to give them to Israel to protect against Iran. And so the latest version was Trump told Germany and the Netherlands and I think, yeah, mainly Germany and the Netherlands, you got to send yours to Ukraine. And they're like, hey, we only got three left. Now you're sending one to Ukraine. Yes, fine, send them two or three more. The Russians will blow them up, a couple more billion down the drain. They don't work. Okay. The British Challenger tank, the German Leopard 2 tank, the U.S. Abrams tank, all this armor. Zelensky said, tanks. We sent it to them. By the way, the UK has pretty much stripped their arsenals of what the few challengers they had left. Same thing with Germany and the Leopard, same thing with the US and the Abrams. They were all left burning on the battlefield. They're too heavy for Ukrainian soil. They're not well suited, and they were invented before the creation of the drone. So using drones and precision guided missiles, etc., Bradley fighting vehicles burning on the battlefield, tanks burning on the battlefield. They did nothing. What about the F-16s? Remember that Biden spent 2 years, are we going to send them F-16s or not? Well, we finally did. Why don't you hear about them? Because they're getting shot down by the Russians. I mean, but with the A300s or the A400s, sorry, the S400s, that's the Russian surface to air anti-missile system. So we've sent them all the wonder weapons and they don't work. In fact, the implications of that are even scarier, which is, oh, NATO sent them all their weapons. They've been blown up and destroyed in the battlefield in Ukraine. They don't work. They haven't stopped the Russians. What's stopping the Russians from going to the English Channel? Nothing. I mean, they're not going to. That's not my forecast. I'm just saying that NATO is actually far from turning the tide in Ukraine. They've proved how impotent they are against the latest Russian weaponry and technology, hypersonic missiles, digital warfare, drones, etc. And who's joined in? Iran and North Korea. We're making them stronger. So every single thing about this has been disastrous for the West, U.S., but obviously NATO and UK and France also. So just to round out this part of the discussion, why will sending more weapons to Ukraine make a difference? The answer is it won't.
Okay.
So it's the same failure. So what's left? Well, economic sanctions. Okay, 100 sanctions haven't worked. Why not try 101? But here's where I said earlier that it's all connected, like on a global basis. So now what Trump wants to do are called secondary sanctions. So we've sanctioned, but you can't sanction Russia anymore. We've sanctioned everything. They can't export. They can't get high technology. Their oil's illegal, et cetera, et cetera. A secondary sanction is when you find another country that's doing business with Russia, and you say, "Hey, if you do business with Russia, we're going to sanction you." Well, who's the you? China and India, because China and India are buying Russian oil, paying dollars, and that is financing the war effort, propping up the Russian economy. No question about it. So, but we haven't been able to stop Russia's exports. So we're saying to China and India, you stop buying Russian oil, we're going to sanction you. Okay. What's going on right now? The U.S. is in bilateral trade talks with India, and we're in bilateral trade talks with China. Okay. If you're India and China, you're sitting there saying, how can I do a deal with the U.S.? You may be a couple of days away from throwing 200% tariffs on me because I'm buying Russian oil. Why are we quibbling over 50% or 20% tariffs? Why should I do anything with you when I don't know what's coming on Friday? Well, the answer is they won't. So the failure of the Indian and Chinese trade talks so far is not because they don't want to talk or they don't know how to make a deal. Of course they do. It's because they're in the crosshairs of secondary sanctions because they get oil from Russia. And how on earth could you agree to any deal if you don't know that Trump's going to smack you with 200% tariffs the next day? It would be ridiculous to make a deal. So this, again, sorry to go on, Brian, but I'm trying to show how from Ukraine to Russian oil exports, imports by China and India, which those countries need to run their economies, to primary sanctions that have failed, military aid that has failed, now to secondary sanctions, which will also fail, but they'll fail in a more spectacular way because they're going to blow up normal bilateral trade talks. I mean, this whole thing is a mess. They have by the way, I tell this to people in the Trump administration. I get a hearing, but it doesn't seem to change the analysis.
That's an incredible breakdown. And now it makes more sense that these talks are sluggish for both China and India. Just a quick question. When you were talking about the military, this highly advanced drone digital army or force, You mentioned, first of all, that nothing's going to stop the Russians from going across the channel, but the intellectual property they're developing. I mean, I've read some of the articles in the journal, which I'm sure don't even do it justice. I mean, that is some scary, dangerous technology. And I'm guessing if you put 1,000 of the high-tech Russian soldiers on American soil, they could probably take out every major leader in the country within 24 hours without the U.S. even knowing what's going on. Now, maybe I'm exaggerating that, but both of these sides, Ukraine and Russia, seem to have extremely advanced digital warfare that I would guess we better all start getting concerned about.
Well, Ukraine has extremely advanced digital warfare, which is completely non-indigenous. It's run by the UK and the US. I mean, it just is with bases in Germany. The other day, Russian special forces landed in a not really a covert operation, but a commando operation is a better way to put it, west of Odessa. Now, the Russians don't control that part of the coastline. That's still Ukraine. But they sent their special operations team west of Odessa, closer to Romania, to take out a Ukrainian command center. And they captured two British officers who have been identified and an MI6 asset who has not been identified. But two soldiers in uniform and one MI6 spy are now Russian prisoners.
Wow.
So, okay, here we are, World War III. I mean, the US and the UK have been, the French have been denying that we have access there. Of course we do. Of course, the CIA has, stations all over the place, operation centers all over the place. So does MI6. So does the UK military. But all the satellite surveillance, the computer capability, the targeting capability, et cetera, all comes from the US and the UK. They're very good at this. Maybe stuff's getting launched from Ukrainian soil. Maybe some Ukrainians play a hand, but they don't have that indigenous capability. So you say the Ukrainians look fairly sophisticated. You're right, but they're sophisticated because they have the US and the UK behind them. So that's the first. The Russians, on the other hand, have done it completely themselves. They're way ahead of the US. The US doesn't have a hypersonic missile. We don't have one. Now, we're working on it. Okay, a little late. By the way, here's another dirty little secret. The stuff we're sending to Ukraine, and I mentioned HIMARS, F-16s, Bradley fighting vehicles, and a lot else. All that stuff, it's
old stuff.
It's old stuff. It's from first of all, it's 80s technology. So it's 40-year-old technology, and it's coming out of inventory, meaning we're giving them the used car lot. The money, when they say U.S. is spending $200 billion on weapons for Ukraine, what we really mean is we've shipped them, notionally $200 billion worth of used garbage, and we're spending the $200 billion to crank out new stuff for ourselves. But here's the problem. Why would you want a new Patriot anti-missile battery? Why would you want a new Abrams tank? They've already proved that even if they're brand new off the assembly line, the technology is obsolete. We need to start over and rebuild the U.S. military from the bottom up with new technology. We can do it, but it'll take 5 years. So we're just behind the 8 ball for at least the next 5 years. And you're absolutely right. The Russians are way ahead of us in all those respects.
When I read those on the ground reports, it's like fascinating. It's like a whole brand new kind of warfare where the tanks don't dare get near the front lines. They'll get taken out. Individual soldiers are now getting taken out by drones. It's that cost effective. And like all these tactics have completely reversed. They got the ground based drones. They've got the ones that don't need radio signals. I mean, it's pretty mind boggling.
You're exactly right. Yeah. Which is one more reason that the Russians are winning. So now getting back to the other side of the ultimatum, Putin's supposed to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. We talked about how they're winning and why they're winning across the entire front. Not much standing between Russia. I said they could go to the English Channel. They're not going to, but they probably could. But they're at least going to go to the Dnieper River, which kind of runs down the middle of Ukraine. And there's very little to stop them at this point. But so Putin's supposed to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. First of all, that's a fraud because Ukraine will not respect the ceasefire. They'll use the time. If you had it, it's not going to happen, by the way. I should be clear about that. But if it did, Ukraine would use the time, stock up on weapons, rotate the troops, give them some R&R, recruit more, kidnap more 16-year-olds off the street, because that's about what they're doing these days, to continue the fight. So they would not use it in good faith, number one. But number two, Show me a winning army in the history of the world that agreed to an unconditional ceasefire.
Hmm.
Doesn't happen. The loser will take a ceasefire, or if like I say, if you've been beaten, you'll agree to it. German army at the end of World War One, the armistice. That was not a peace treaty. The peace treaties happened from 1919 to 1922. But what happened in 1918, November 11th, 1918, was an armistice, which is roughly the equivalent of a ceasefire. But the people who agreed to it were the losers, which were the Germans. Same thing here. So yeah, Ukraine will sign up for that because they want to buy time. But why should the Russians? Why would you ever?
Okay. All right. So we're going to watch. Probably Trump will do some symbolic things. Putin won't respond, and it'll just be back to business as usual.
Well, I wouldn't say symbolic. If you put secondary sanctions on China and India because they're buying Russian oil, and you try to eliminate the Russian ghost fleet of tankers, the Russians will fill a tanker with oil, send it out. They'll turn off their transponders, turn off their GPS, paint the back of the vessel so you don't know where it's from, and it'll meet another vessel at sea, and they'll transship the oil and then send it to China. That's going on. It's going on every day. The other big thing is we're going to cut you out of the insurance market. The Russians, are not going to be able to go to Lloyd's of London and get insurance on your transshipment.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.